Hello, everyone. It's treason and executions today because I wasn't here last week because I was doing both of those excellent exhibitions down in London with my good friend Dr. Cat. And I'm going to take you through as much as I can of the exhibitions today because I know many of you wished you could have gone or have gone, and I'm sure you'd like to chat about it as well. So that is what we're going to do today: executions and treason. We're going to do it the way around: treason and executions. They were actually separate exhibitions on in two completely different places, but they seem to run on quite well from each other, and so that is what we did in one day. Dr. Cat and I went to the Treason exhibition that was at the National Archives that has now closed, and then to executions at London, at the Museum of London, Docklands, which I think closes on the 16th, which would be Sunday. So if you're watching on YouTube, I've got a few, or on Facebook, excuse me, I've got a few pictures to bring up. Not a lot, not a huge amount, because you kind of put, turns out on my software I can only upload 10. There were so many more. But if you are signed up to my free Substack letter, then you would have already seen a few of them. Excuse me, let me see if I can get these comments up so I can see them better. Hi everyone, who I can see some very familiar names coming up. Hello, welcome. How are you doing? And hello, thank you for joining me live. I'm streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, of course. Hello if you're in the catch-up crew, and also welcome, of course, if you are listening on the podcast. So it's oh no, I can't get these. Let's have a look. Thank you, Maria. Yes, I had an excellent Easter. I hope everyone else did, whether you are celebrating it for its traditional means or for the chocolate, whatever, for the family time. I hope you all had a great weekend anyway. So Melissa, I'm good as well. Yes, you're waiting for your coffee to finish. I have my tea. It is tea time, History Chat Live of a Wednesday every week at 1 o'clock. Like I say, I wasn't here last week because I was at these exhibitions. So that is what we're going to cover today. And Yolanda, I can see, I love British history. Well, if you like British history, then you are in the right place. I try and cover as broad a range of eras as possible, and stories and places. So it's quite a good mix for you. Remember, please, you can support this live stream and all the free work that I do on Instagram with badges, on YouTube with super chats, Facebook with stars. You can go along to my Substack and not just the tune. Catherine doesn't have tea. That's because we still need to educate her. Yeah, so you can support me that way. You can go on to my free Substack, which is, I can't remember, philippa.b at .substack.com, I think. I'll put the link is in my Instagram bio. And that's my free weekly newsletter. You can also, and what I'd love you to do, is come along to my Patreon. It's British History on Patreon. It's £5 a month, and you get lots of different and wide-ranging history lover benefits, including Ask a Historian Your Own Questions. If you are a patron already, make sure you get over to the site and put your question forward for Sarah Slater, who is she's one of the fantastic tour guides at Hampton Court Palace. So we're going to be asking her all about guiding at Hampton Court Palace, but the stories she knows. Sarah actually guides my tours when I take them to Hampton Court, my tour groups when I take them to Hampton Court Palace, and the stories she knows, they're incredible. So we're going to get a few out of her when I do the interview. Amy, I went to the Imperial War Museum on Monday to saw the Holocaust exhibition, cried my eyes out. I remember seeing that quite a few years ago, and it has stuck with me, as it should. But yeah, harrowing. But I will warn you, today's topics of treason, and especially the execution ones, are a little harrowing as well. Not as much as if you've been to the Imperial War Museum. I don't think, but yes. So just to warn you, Linda in Michigan, how are you? How are you? I hope you're doing well and had a lovely weekend with the family. Maria, I've worked at the Tower of London and Hever Castle, so lovely to be part of it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. What fabulous workplaces that you have had. Yeah, so I thought I would take you through some of my favourite, that seems a bit odd actually, parts of the exhibitions. They did go really well together. And there were a couple of the stories that linked through from one to the other, because of course execution had followed treason in all of the cases. So, but anyway, so there were a few stories that overlapped, which I thought was really good. Just as a sort of heads up to look out for things as well, the National Archives, it was a brilliant exhibition anyway. The number of documents that you would go along to see just one of them, and there was so many of them like that there, and I'm going to take you through them. The space was really good. So look out for the National Archives. What they've got coming up next, I don't know what it is, but also look out, they do a lot of online events. I'm actually attending one tomorrow on the Magna Carta. So anyone, if you're interested in this sort of thing, doesn't matter whereabouts in the world you are, have a look on the National Archives website for online events. And then the executions exhibition was on at the Museum of London Docklands. Now, the Museum of London I've spoken about before, that used to be at the Barbican, I think it was. I got that wrong. I think it was on the London, on London Wall Road. That's the original Museum of London, and it just closed at Christmas, ready to be moved to its new site at, not Smithfield, what's the other one? Anyway, it's closed for a couple of years, but the Museum of London have this Docklands site as well. Fabulous exhibition space, and they used it so well. So again, have a look out for, if you're coming to London, have a look out for what they might have on while you're there. Right, let's go for it. Now, some of you have got would get my newsletter, or if you're on my Patreon, you've seen some photos and you've heard me talk about this exhibition before, but I think it's worth repeating some bits, and there's also some bits that I've not been able to cover yet. So I'm going to do that because it's a dreary day. It's a horrible weather here at the moment. It's it's just over a month till the first tour, till the Anne Boleyn tour in May. And touch wood, we usually have really good weather. And it rained like this last year, right up until the first day of the tour. And then it was fine. So please do that again. Actually, another thing to mention before I get going is the books that went with the exhibitions, because you can get these. The History of Treason is on Audible as well. That accompanies the exhibition that was on at the National Archives. And Executions, this is smaller books. This might be a little bit easier to get hold of with postage, I'm not sure. This one went with the exhibition that was on at the Museum of London Docklands. So yes, Melissa's so excited. Not long now. This is very exciting when it gets into tour season. Come on, weather. Although, to be fair, I did one tour I did, and it was raining, and one of the ladies from America, she did turn around to me. She was very sweet. She turned around and went, "Philippa, we don't come to England for the weather." Fair point. Okay, so let's kick off the Treason exhibition. Now this is where I think the book as well is well worth a go. This is also there's a podcast, the Rest is History podcast. If you look that up, they interviewed, I think they did 2 or 3 episodes where they interviewed the guys who put together this exhibition. And so that was incredibly insightful. And obviously that's free and a good introduction, dive into the world of treason. Now, the Treason Act is the first piece of manuscript that you see, and it's centre to the exhibition. It was Tales from the Fox Den. Bad weather is a good excuse to have a nice cup of tea. It is. It is. It is. It's not so good on a sunny day, actually, is it? A cup of tea. So, Linda, Anne Boleyn tour in 2022 was gorgeous weather. It was, but it rained right up until right over to a few days before, because I spent a few days with you before, didn't I? A few days before, and then the day we left, it poured down, didn't it? It was like we got the sunny window. So fingers crossed, everybody. So you first go into the exhibition, and it was the actual act, the Treason Act, 1531 if you're a lawyer, 2 if you're a historian. And the reason for that is it was passed in the January. Hi Jenna, how are you doing? The Treason Act was passed in January 1352, if you think about it from a January to January calendar. But at the time, up until the 25th of March, was considered, so it wasn't New Year until basically the middle to third week in March. So you may hear it as the Treason Act 1351, and that's the reason. Now, treason had already been a crime, quote unquote, a crime, because there was no act of parliament that went with it. So this was a attempt to define exactly what treason was, because it was a fluid concept. As you go through the exhibition, and if you read the book or if you listen to the podcasts about it, actually, from my understanding, it remained pretty fluid. And you only have to know a little bit about the Tudor period, for instance, or go into the Stuart period with the trial of Charles I, to realise that the definition of treason was moulded to what was required by the powers that be, whoever they were and whatever purpose they had at the time. So what I think you'll find interesting, though, especially if you are a bit of a Tudors fan, and we'll get on to the trial document of Anne Boleyn a little bit later on, because that was in the exhibition. In fact, that was the one that was the document that got me to or prick my ears to get me to go all the way down to London to have a look. But you were I'll tell you, and you may remember, Anne Boleyn was tried for treason. The men were tried for treason. Now, the men were tried for treason, but from a different. So the crime was the same, but the way they committed treason was different to the way Anne committed treason, and this was to do with the bit, if you remember, the encompassing or imagining the death of the king. Now, that sounds like a Henry VIII thing. I actually thought it was a Henry VIII thing, that it sounded like, especially the imagining the death of the king. That's a bit much. And in Henry's time, you get to the point where people don't want to talk about they don't want to tell him he's dying on his deathbed. He's Catholic. He needs to hear his last rites, and no one wants to tell him he's dying, because this has been a treasonous. This is a treason to imagine the king's death. But that was in the original act of treason. I'm going to say 1532 for simplicity purposes. So that actually is in the act of treason from the beginning, the encompassing or imagining the death of the king. And it would be king. Also in there was the violation of the king's wife, the queen, the violation of the king's eldest daughter, the violation of the heir's wife. That is what the men in 1536, along with Anne Boleyn. Uh, that was their treason. Her treason was imagining the death of the king. Maria, is that still a law now? I hope not. There's so many. I mean, but no. They're a very interesting question as to when it was taken, off the statute books, actually. But I mean, it stood clearly so for a very long time. It had to be. And I've done an actual live on this when I did if you look a few episodes back, when I actually looked at how could we try a king of England, king, sorry, because the act says that that you can't imagine the death of the king. It's basically to protect the king and protect his power. Never would it have been envisaged that you could have turned that on the king himself, which is what happened in the case of Charles I. Now, because I've done a whole episode on that, I'm not going to go into it now. And it took a lot of legal, mind-blowing gymnastics, really, to get there. And Maria, there are still ancient laws applicable today, aren't there? Yeah, there are some. I don't think there are as many. You see the memes of like you can still, I don't know, shoot someone for carrying a twig. I don't know, whatever. On a bus. There's like, or you can't eat chocolate on a Tuesday if you're a woman. I don't know, whatever. I think they're just more for the likes. Yeah. So yeah, so that the bit that you may have known about the act of treason from looking at the trial of Anne Boleyn, that was there from the beginning. Now there's a few documents that let me see if I've got them on. So if you're on YouTube and Facebook, I'm bringing up some documents. On Instagram, you can always pop over and have a look later. Claudia, I'm curious what you feel about Anne Boleyn. In what way, Claudia? We can well, I do a tour on her every year. In fact, I've got 2 tours on Anne Boleyn this year. Now, it's not because I have any I'm not somebody who is a sycophant for anybody, alive or dead. She is a pivotal figure, incredibly interesting lady in history, and people love to learn about her, and we love to talk about her. So Castor von Clem, we have a law like that here too. Something about alligators in a pool or riding elephants on Sundays. I mean, they're important things to get down on paper. We need to know where we stand with our elephants on Sundays, or not stand with them, or whatever. So the document I have up, and I will explain it to you on Instagram. I've got it up on YouTube and Facebook. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Act of Attainder against Richard III. It was created posthumously by Henry VII and his Parliament. And this is a document that you may have heard of already. This is the one that dates the reign of Henry VII to the day before the Battle of Bosworth. Why would you do that? It means that everyone, including Richard himself, who turned out on the battlefield that day, turned out as a traitor. So, I mean, it's audacious. It's audacious. It was an audacious move, but he did it. And this is one of the first things Henry VII does. He's I mean, you could say he's a politician, but he just made something up to get his way. Now, everyone who turns out on the field of battle, who is now obviously under the new Tudor regime, he can forgive. But that document does say that you're guilty. So be careful, but he'll forgive you for now. It's a piece of power play. I'm just trying to find, now I may not be able to as we're speaking, the actual sort of crimes that they put against Richard, because there is something in there about spilling children's blood. Now, obviously, the case of the princes in the tower, incredibly controversial, even this far past it. Who did it? Why did they do it? But yes, but the fact is that that they have that Henry VII had this Act of Parliament, this Act of Attainder passed. So no, I'm not going to spend a long time trying to find it now. But there is something about spilt blood and children. Claudia, I know Henry wanted to get rid of her. I don't believe she was guilty, but for those days she was pretty arrogant, if you will. Although I do respect her for many things. So the charges against Anne Boleyn. Well, we'll come back to Anne Boleyn, actually. Should we come back to Anne Boleyn? Because I do have the copy of the document to have a look at over on Facebook and YouTube, but I'll tell you about it. Did the princes even die, Amy? Did they even die? So Linda says Gareth Russell. So Gareth Russell is a fantastic historian. He's written so many brilliant books. His latest one, the sort of biography of the Queen Mother in 101 Anecdotes, one for every year that she was that she lived, and but he's written fabulous books, the biography on Catherine Howard, and I've got an interview with him on my YouTube channel about the downfalls of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. And Linda says that he's also been on with Susanna Lipscomb on the Not Just the Tudors. Oh yeah, that's her podcast, isn't it? In regards to Catherine Howard and Lady Jane Rochford. Yes, sorry, Jane Lady Rochford. Yes. So yes, there's lots of stuff you can listen to about them. So where was I? So yes, so this Act of Attainder. So that was something I had been dying to see. Now the other one, or the next one I'm going to talk about, is the Act for Poisoning. And the reason I want to talk about this one is it's notorious because it appears in the Tudors series. If you watched that, was that Showtime? And I should also say, Maria's just reminded me, talking about Gareth again. How can I forget? He is my tour historian. He's the tour historian on all my tours that I've got running this year, and the Anne Boleyn tour next year, which is, I've only got one room left, by the way. So if you're interested in doing the Anne Boleyn tour in May, I have one room left for 2024. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait till 2025. But yeah, Gareth is the tour historian with us. So the Act for Poisoning. Now, this was brought in again under Henry VIII, and because poison, wasn't a treasonable offence. Now you see how straight. The reason we have poisoning down as treason is because Henry VIII was paranoid about poisoning, about poisons and being poisoned. So even though the Act of 1352 is supposed to be trying to define treason, within 200 years, and actually probably before that, but this is a good example of it being molded and changed. Yeah, Henry's just decided poisoning is treason. No logic behind it. But there you go. And this was passed to basically in order to execute, well, they could have done it via murder. Via a murder charge. The cook for, I think it was Bishop Fisher, he didn't die, but a lot of his household did. And switch your ears off for a moment if you don't want to know how he died, because it is as executions go, and this was talked about in the executions exhibition as well, his is grim, very, very grim. Um, and the punishment for it was execution by being boiled alive. What I'm not sure about is, oh, Melissa says that the history of treason, this book from the National Archives, that the National Archives ships internationally. So thank you, Melissa. So you'll be able to get hold of that. I think it's just come out. Has it just come out in paperback, or have I made that up? Because this is hardback, the one I've got, which probably makes the posting more expensive. Now the act of poisoning, so the as treason, that was used twice, and it was taken back in Edward VI. So as soon as Edward VI was on the throne, he pulled back a lot of what was a lot of what his dad had done, actually. Anyway, one of the things was this act. Yes, Casto. Yes, I know. Oh my world. Word. Not a good thing. No, not a nice thing to think about. Lottie Rose, nothing beats George Clarence's death. Well, oh dear. I know. I wonder if he'd been allowed to drink a bit of it first, it might have been a bit better. So that was the act of the porridge poisoner, the act for poisoning. The other the next thing that I haven't got a photograph of it, but in the exhibition they had the act of succession, Henry VIII's act of succession, which of course led to many people going to trial and being convicted of treason, because Henry VIII puts himself as the head of the church in the country, and many people, including people he's very close to, like Sir Thomas More, cannot accept it. Again, this links to the executions exhibition as well, because in the executions exhibition there is a lot about Tyburn, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail a little bit later on. You may remember the tale of the monks at Charterhouse. That's Charterhouse in London, and the prior and a number of them, well, they all actually said they prayed on it and they couldn't accept Henry as the head of the church. Now that got them all killed in one way, shape or other. The prior plus 3 other priors, so I can't remember the name of the prior that I was thinking of, but anyway, he and 3 other priors, a monk and a lay brother, were all hung at Tyburn, and all had for treason basically because they wouldn't accept Henry as head of the church. Now that is also what happened to Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More got Henry wanted him to capitulate, and he gave him opportunity to, but he never did. Now, whether Henry is trying to get Sir Thomas to capitulate because he loves him, because he's a friend, because he's been a confidant, because he's been there by his side the entire time, or because it would have been an excellent coup for him, I don't know. Leave that up to you to decide. Hello, Heidi. How are you? Better late than never, indeed. That's okay. So another, of course, then we've briefly talked about this already, is Anne Boleyn, victim of Henry's wrath. And it's not for now, but there's always the debate, isn't there? Was it Cromwell? Was it Henry? And we've discussed this many times on History After Dark. We've discussed it elsewhere, and we kind of always come around to the idea, to the thought process that Cromwell couldn't have done something without Henry's express say so, without his either direction or seal of approval for it. How far Cromwell went with it, of course, might be something different. Now, I've had the document up on YouTube and Facebook. Now, where you see the bigger um, uh, words, then they're names of people. Yes, Amy, exactly. If Henry had wanted her dead, sorry, if Henry hadn't wanted her dead, she wouldn't have died. Indeed, indeed. So, I mean, I do fully believe that the not only were the accusations of adultery untrue, but that wasn't actually, like I said earlier, what got her convicted. That's what got the men convicted of treason. She was convicted of treason for the imagining of the king's death, a conversation that was overheard between her and Norris. And I have a series of videos on YouTube with the downfall of Anne Boleyn, which go in chronological order. I think there's 4 parts to it, which you can have a look at. And I cover all of this in there. But it was incredibly moving to see the trial document, to see the actual document of the the trial of Anne Boleyn, which took place by the way at the Tower of London in the Great Hall, which doesn't exist any longer. That is where that all happened. But it was incredible to see the document. So moving on from the Tudors. No, leave the Tudors. No, we have to move on from them. I'm going to take you to have I got this one? Or if I haven't got this one, I don't think I've got this one to show you on Facebook, but it was in my newsletter. It was the Monteagle letter, and I think I've gone on about this a little bit before, actually. If you watched History After Dark last week, Kat and I were talking about our visits, and she challenged me to come up with 3 documents that I was most excited about seeing at the exhibitions, and the Monteagle letter was one of the ones that I picked out for the Treason exhibition. Now, the Monteagle letter is the one that was sent by one of the conspirators. Don't know who, but there were fingers pointed to their, I think it was their brother-in-law, Lord Monteagle, hence the name Monteagle letter, basically warning him not to go to the state opening of Parliament. And it actually says that Parliament would receive a blow. So a not too subtle pun. And that's what was he reported it, and that's what led to the searches under the House of Parliament and the discovery of Guy Fawkes. And in the exhibition, they also had the declaration by Guy Fawkes and the other conspirators, to basically that they had been involved in this plot. They also had now this, I've put it up on Facebook and Instagram, on YouTube, excuse me, and so for you on Instagram, it's this massive, it's a smallish document with a huge seal, and it's the seal of James I. And this document makes the 5th of November a public holiday, a holiday of Thanksgiving for the saviour of James I, and his eldest son Prince Henry would have been with him as well. It would have blown Parliament up. We would, if the gunpowder plot had succeeded. Jenna's liking it on YouTube. Yeah. On the, sorry, it's absolutely pelting it down with rain outside. If the gunpowder plot had succeeded, from my understanding from people who know, I don't know anything about gunpowder and explosives. Why would I? But from listening to people who do, the crater that would have been created, I'm not sure what we would have had left of that part of London. So the House of Parliament would have gone. I don't know how much of Westminster Abbey would have survived. And of course, you're right next to the Thames. So presumably everywhere would have been flooded. It would have been a catastrophe. And it makes me wonder, it would have I think it would have changed where well, clearly where the seat of power would have ended up, because our parliament still meets at the Palace of Westminster, and it, where would it have gone? Oh, I just find it fascinating, the kind of the repercussions that would have come just from the physical damage that the gunpowder plot would have wreaked had it have succeeded. But yes, so here is Jane. So Dr. Cat was talking about the seal because it was a little bit unnecessarily large. but there you go. We're not one to be understated. James the First. Now, James the First's son, Charles the First, and we've already spoken a little bit about this, was tried for treason. And like I say, I have a whole hour, if you look a few episodes back, on how on earth could we try a king for treason if treason laws were to protect the king. Maria, no clue why the gunpowder plot brought Winston Churchill to mind, but how big is Winston the dog now? So I have a old English bulldog called Winston, who was an incredibly cute little puppy. He's now a rather large dog. He's still really cute. He's still puppyish because he isn't yet one, but he's a big dog. He's a big dog. Melissa says, I found a show on YouTube that recreated the gunpowder plot. They rebuilt the building and added in the people and then blew it up. Ooh. All they found of James was the top of his head. Oh, that's grim. It's a grim episode. Beverly says, I saw a documentary that the gunpowder was degraded, and so would not have been as potent or dangerous. So, yes, so it could have been any. I mean, even if it had done less damage than it would have potentially done, presumably there was still going to be enough damage that it could have meant that a change in the seat of power was required. Although saying that had already happened in Henry VIII's reign, ish. Actually, well, let's not go. That's probably a bit more complicated. That'll get me off on a tangent. But when the Palace of Westminster burnt down in Henry VIII's reign, this is when you get the Whitehall Palace, rise of Whitehall Palace, which had taken over from York Place, taken over from Cardinal Wolsey, and was rebuilding it for him and Anne. But necessarily the court had to move there because the Palace of Westminster burnt down. But it was actually enough for the Parliament to still meet there. But obviously the real power was with Henry, that was at Whitehall. And I'm sure Simon Thurley in his book talked about it being called the New Westminster, as if it was going to be whole scale moved over. Melissa, not real people, mannequins. Good. Right, Charles I. So Charles I's trial. Charles I, James I's son, Mary Queen of Scots' grandson, is tried for treason. And the document now bound. So if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, you'll see it looks like it's in a book because it's bound, and that is the trial document of Charles I. Charles I, famously, he didn't recognise the court and refused to recognise their jurisdiction. But it's just incredible to see the actual document. Other things that were in there, right next to the trial document, was there was an act of attainder after the Restoration for the so-called regicides, the people who had signed the death warrant for Charles I, and there was also the bill that was it a bill that an order, sorry, the exhumation order for Oliver Cromwell. Link back to Tyburn. Oliver Cromwell's corpse was hung at Tyburn, and his head was popped on a spike over Westminster Hall until it got blown down in a gale. There you go. So yeah, so you had that. There was so much in this Treason exhibition. Honestly, I could go on forever. Have a look at the book. Have a look for it on Audible. I'm not plugging it because I don't get anything for this, by the way. I think you'll like it, so that's why I'm telling you about it. The Rest is History podcast was very good as well as a starter for 10, as I say, for looking at that. So I want to move on to the executions exhibition. This closes, I'm pretty sure it closes on Sunday. Caroline heads will roll. Yeah, they will if they get blown down off their spike. Yeah. So Linda says seeing those documents in person is amazing. It was so incredible because I could keep going on about all the ones that were there. And so it was cabinet after cabinet after cabinet. And it was set out in chronological order. So like I say, the first thing you saw was the Treason Act of 1532. 1352, sorry, I keep getting that wrong, right? 1352. And then it went in chronologically. So I'm stopping at sort of the Stuart period, but it kept going. It kept going. Casto, it's amazing you have time to read and put out all this content. Yeah, I'm not actually sure how my brain copes. Right, so linked so well over to the executions exhibition in no particular order. Actually, what I've done is I've picked out a few things that I think you will like to see. Some things that were hard hitting, so really brought the essence of the exhibition to mind, sort of a bit hard hitting. We've heard about the executions so often, beheadings on Tower Hill, hangings at Tyburn, burnings at the stake of heretics, etc., etc. So I think, I don't know about you, but I think we can sort of get a little bit immune to it, to what that actually means. Sorry, Maria. Were Charles' trial documents publicly available at all back then? Just wondering how his next level petty son got hold of all the names. So yeah, so the act of it, the death warrant was an act of record, piece of record. So yeah, he got hold of it. I think there was a lot of people chasing as well, though. I don't think it was just contained to. I think when Charles II was restored and went after the people who he saw as being responsible for the death of his father, I think he promised certain dispensations for whatever reason, and then would go back on his word. And I think there was. I don't think it was as simple as, right, here's the list of names and they're just the people he went after. I think there was some ebbing and flowing of the definition of who he was going to go after. But in the executions exhibition, they had items that they think were that belonged to Charles I. Now there's a what they've called a vest or shirt in that I've seen on documentaries before that I've seen said was Charles I, what Charles I was actually wearing at his execution. Hello, Jackie over there in Baltimore. How are you doing? However, when I looked at it, so I was very excited. This is actually the shirt, Charles I shirt, is what I went to this particular exhibition to see. So the Treason one, the Anne Boleyn trial document, was the one that caught my eye. In this one, it was the Charles I shirt. However, they can't actually be totally sure of the provenance or that he wore it on the day of his execution. Boo-hoo. But but it was moving to see it. And we saw a portrait that we had never seen before. When I say portrait, it that's probably not quite, I don't know, what do you call it? It's a painting, um, really depicting Charles I as a martyr. So he has his eyes closed, he has the white um, cap on from his execution. His hair is perfect. Um, and his head's been sewn back on. So he's shown as a martyr, and you have depictions of England, Wales, and Ireland allegories, grieving, bereft at the death of the king. And Kat and I had never seen this painting before, and there was not much information with it. So don't know when it was painted, or by whom, or who owns it now. So I don't know if it's owned by the museum themselves or it's been loaned. Normally it has a thing saying if it's been loaned, but there was nothing next to it. So it was quite intriguing. So there was a lot to do with Charles I there. And also quite a lot to do with Tyburn. One of the things that really got me was so they had lots of first of all, sort of wood carving, the pictures from like Fox's Book of Martyrs, then hangings at Tyburn, depictions of beheadings on Tower Hill, hangings in the Docklands area for smugglers. And the one thing that went through all of these was the size of the crowds. Yes, Maria, my mic is fluffy. It was cutting out a little bit last week. Is the sound okay, everybody? Let me know. Trying things out. Yeah, it's the size of the crowds. Just how many people would come out to see the executions. And and so Tyburn, which you can see on this little map that I'm showing on Facebook and YouTube. Here is the Tyburn tree next to the park. So at Tyburn, there was actually by the mid 18th century. Oh, good, this sounds good. By the mid 18th century, was a permanent stand created, ready for execution days, that people could pay to go into and sit in. Thank you, Heidi. So the public spectacle of it, because I should make clear that the exhibition was about public executions. It's about 700 years, the period of 700 years of public executions in London, because London has the largest concentration of execution sites anywhere in this country. So there was a really good graphic at the beginning of the exhibition of a map, like an old map of London, and it went through all the execution sites. And by the time they'd plotted them all on, and they did it with blood splatters, graphics of blood splatters, which are very effective, it covered the city. So yeah, that was stark. That was a good, really powerful way to depict the sites. So yeah, so I thought, anyway, Tyburn actually, so on this map of, oh goodness, I can't remember what year the map was. Sorry about that. I think it's, yeah, I don't want to guess. I think it's 18th century map, but either way, it's of Middlesex, the map. The Tyburn tree actually features on there, so it's a permanent feature by that point. And the Tyburn tree, so it was a permanent hanging execution site for hangings, and the tree, so it's not a tree, it was built, and it's like a triangular frame or triangular shape, so with 3 legs, a tripod basically, with a triangular frame, because it was more efficient, because they could hang more people at one time. Linda's just said being at the site on Tower Hill with the names of those who died there was very moving. Yes, we went there last year as part of the Anne Boleyn tour. So we visit the Tower of London on the 19th of May to coincide with the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution there. And for anyone who wants to, and I think everyone came with us last time, didn't they? We take a walk up to Tower Hill, which is outside of the Tower of London. So you notice in the executions exhibition, there was nobody. So Anne Boleyn doesn't feature because she's not executed publicly. It's looking at public executions. But Tower Hill, of course, outside of the Tower of London, is a public execution site. Was a public execution site. Claudia says, if you think about it, history repeats itself. I think the world is going through similar things. History always repeats itself, and sometimes that's most of the time I think that's reassuring, and that we know it's going through cycles sometimes, but it can be incredibly frustrating. You think if everyone there's this panacea, I think, isn't there, that if we all knew our history, that we could change, we could see things coming and we could change things. But yeah. But Maria says, why do us humans become more efficient only when homicidal mass murders are involved? So I thought you might like a look at this map. Sorry, on Instagram, but you can always go back and have a little look at this. I'm not sure if I can share it elsewhere because I don't know what the copyright is of it, but it shows the Tower of London and the Tower Hill execution site, which Linda has just helpfully brought up. And it's really a beautiful map of the Tower of London. I don't know if I can zoom in. No, I don't think I can. But yes, so it shows the Tower of London, White Tower, of course. Actually, the Great Hall is still there, and the apartments on this the royal apartments that Anne Boleyn was kept in are still there on this depiction. And you have Tower Hill. The moat is flooded, which it's not now. You can see the main gate coming in. And yes, you can see the proximity of the Tower Hill site to the Tower of London from this map. So I thought you might like to look at that because that's quite interesting. Another point to Linda's point as well about looking at the site now at Tower Hill. So there's a sort of memorial garden. It's a square piece. It's not that big actually. Sort of cobbled, and there are plaques around the side with the names of people who were executed there. It's by no means everyone who was executed there. In fact, I don't think any of the men who were beheaded there in May 1536, who were brought down as part of Anne Boleyn's downfall, I don't think any of them are there. But it's not clear why certain ones were picked out and not others. So the executions exhibition was very hard hitting, but there were a couple of things that there's one thing in particular that made it really when something actually you can sort of, it's not something that's happened in the past, it's something that you're suddenly sort of connected with. I don't know if that makes makes sense to anybody else, but for me in this exhibition it was one of the petitions for mercy. So the executions exhibition wasn't a chronological exhibition. It went through the stages of from being convicted and to being prepared for execution, the mercy, so the trial if there was one, petitions for mercy, the preparing for execution, and it actually went on to talk about as well what happened to executed bodies, because a little bit further on in time they were given over for medical research. But the petitions for mercy were, I felt, particularly hard hitting, and there was one in particular, and I spoke about this in my I think I spoke about this on History After Dark last week, and I definitely put it into my Substack newsletter, which is free if you want it. And it's the petition petition for mercy for a 18-year-old man. I have a soon to be 18-year-old to me, they're still children. Maybe that's just me, but anyway, his name was John Harwood. He was 18, and he'd been involved in a highway robbery, and he had been sentenced to die. And a petition for mercy went in. He was part of a gang of older people who had, as far as the petition said, taken advantage of him while he was drunk, and suggested he was involved and whatever. And his mother is one of the signatories on this petition for mercy. Her name is Priscilla Harwood, and she can't sign her own name because she hasn't ever been taught to read or write. And so her signature, her mark on this petition for mercy for her 18-year-old son, which makes me want to cry, was a cross. And that, I found that really, really hit me. And like I said, if you've been watching all the way through, I went to this exhibition with Dr. Cat, and we were talking about yes, sure, Aston. Although that's rather quick for a question, you've only just joined. Dr. Cat and I were going around this, and it's just it was a waste of life. They actually had a part where there was a big list going up a screen of, oh, I'm just reconnecting on Instagram. There was a list on the screen so there was a list on this screen that went up of people who'd been executed and their crimes. I mean, crimes. Let's do the air quotes thing. It was this was not for it. Didn't deserve death, and it was just getting more and more hard hitting as the exhibition went on. It's quite exhausting actually looking at this sort of thing, but incredibly important, I think. And we were saying how lucky we're looking at it as a piece of history. This still happens. People are still put to death for crimes, and what is a crime changes. One of the they also had a piece, and I'm going to show you one of them, but they had the broadsheets, so the newspapers, and so how the executions had been reported on. Not the one I have up on the screen on YouTube and Facebook, but another one was the report of 2 men who had been executed for sodomy, but people died. People were killed for that. So yeah, it was really hard hitting. Now this I will probably end on. This is I just think if you want a little bit more evidence of how things don't change much and how we should always be aware of how things are done. This is the broadsheet. So this is like I said, the newspaper reporting of executions. This particular one is a broadsheet article about the life trial, confession, and execution of a man called Thomas Corrigan. And you might not be able to see this on the screen unless you blow it up. For those on Instagram anyway, I would explain there are different sections talking about the crime, talking about the trial, and talks about, there's a whole column about the execution, including the noise he makes when he's hung. Before that, his last words were supposed to, so this was, he was convicted of killing his wife in 1856, and Thomas's last words were supposed to have been, "When I slew my dear Louisa, wandering was my jealous mind." So they have his last words, they have a description of his execution, they have a description of the noises he makes. Yet he actually had his sentence commuted to transportation. He goes to Australia. He actually is a free man by 1861, and he works as a journalist, perhaps one slightly better than the one who'd pretended to cover his execution. Interesting, right? Yes, I know, Maria. Yeah, so that is uh yeah, so the sort of that was the term used in the law at the time. Again, actually, Gareth Russell has a really good podcast episode on sort of the on sodomy, the supposed crime of sodomy. Um, yeah. So, yeah, it is a jarring word, and but unfortunately, that is it just what it was, what the actual crime was down as. So I'm going to finish there because we've got to the hour. Thank you so much for joining me. Just a reminder of the books that you might enjoy if you want to look into this a bit more. Casto van Clem says this proves written history can't always be trusted. Not just history, darling. Not just history. Yeah, so Execution, 700 Years of Public Execution. That's by the Museum of London. They sell that on their website. History of Treason, like I said, that's also on, sorry, Instagram, it's a little bit blurry. History of Treason is also on Audible, and apparently the National Archives do worldwide postage. We've got to the hour, you see. Now my brain's going, what am I saying? Now, just as a little reminder, if you're not part of my Patreon, come along and join us. This is the book we're reading at the moment for our book club, Blood, Fire and Gold by Estelle Perronc, the dual biography of Elizabeth I and Catherine de Medici. We're meeting next on the 21st of May. So if you want to come along, join me on Patreon, join the rest of us. We're having a lot of fun over there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. There's no History After Dark tonight because we're having a bit of a break. But if you watch us there, that's me, Dr. Kat, and Catherine Brooks. We are back next week, 8:15. We're talking about Richard the Lionheart, Coeur de Lion. So I will see you for this show this time next week for History After Dark. Next Wednesday evening. All right, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you really soon. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.